Okay, so our final panel, we've got Sarah Gehlert from the Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, James Herbert Williams from SWER, Darla Spence Coffey from the Council on Social Work Education, Katherine Wehrmann, and Angelo McClain from the National Association of Social Workers. We're going to alternate the order here a little bit because, like a lot of other folks, some of these folks have to catch a plane. So we're going to start with Sarah, and then Darla Spence Coffey, and then we'll carry on.
Good afternoon, and bear in mind that we didn't see the presentations before this panel, so I've been like writing notes with arrows all over. But Mark challenged us to pause to analyze the purpose, and this panel, I think, is really to look for the next 100 years. So I'm giving you the perspective of really senior academic social workers in the Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. And since we are much older, there should be wisdom. I was chagrined to realize all of a sudden that some fellows, including me, have been around for 7/10 of the first 100 years. That was a joke. You're supposed to laugh. But it seems to me that after the conference on social work and the experience with Flexner, that we tried first to fit in. We really, really wanted to be professionals. We wanted to be a profession. And as you heard the long list that Mark gave us, it was policymakers, practitioners, it was supervisors. And there were some people gathering data like Sophonisba Breckenridge and Edith Abbott, but really most were practitioners. So we worked at first to be a profession. And then after time, I think there was a split. Some of us split off. And instead of being a profession, it became cooler to be a discipline. So some of us split from wanting to be professionals to wanting to be disciplinary scholars, and we wanted our discipline of social work to be considered credible. So I see this split during the first 100 years, and what I'm going to talk about is how to maybe bring us back together in the next 100 years and why I think that's possible. So we really need to synthesize the two. We've never synthesized the two. We've got, the people who do interprofessional practice and interdisciplinary, and they don't really kind of put it together for us. So I think that we moved to this, to wanting to be scientific in a traditional mode. And if you look back to 1912, I just happen to know this quote from Richard Cabot, who established health social work. He hired the first health social worker who was actually a nurse. But he said that physicians and social workers could learn from one another because physicians certainly needed to understand the non-somatic aspects of health, but that social workers needed to be more scientific and systematic. They couldn't always just operate from the moral high ground. So I think we agree with that. But then I think we might have gone too far in the opposite direction. I think that we might have moved too far from our practice brethren. And I've got too many arrows here, but basically, NIH helped. If you look at the history of social work, NIH really started paying attention to social work, and they gave us a lot of research opportunities, and they gave us research training. But again, it kind of moved us further away from practice, from this model. We became cooler to look like the hard sciences. And as Zumi pointed out, I think funding became more and more required. You were much more likely to get tenure and promotion if you had external funding. And it was interesting. So we moved away from practice. And I think actually, as you're talking, I was thinking that you could almost map the decline in diversity with this move to trying to look scientific, looking like the guys who were getting a lot of funding. So now we're in this political and social climate that's really drawing attention to social factors for the first time in a long time. And I'm in the health arena, and I see other people trying to grab this. They're really trying to grab it. So And also, you know, it is the case that in the master's program we focus more on clinical, but we really don't in doctoral programs. Getting a doctoral PhD, we won't open a can of worms here, but it's not as easy. And so we rely on the training on the master's program for many too many adjunct instructors. I just had to throw that in. I was so glad that Beth taught Mary, because that's probably why Mary is so successful and she's here today. And this is a case for community too. It's not as easy to get a PhD or to get tenure if you're in community. The numbers were low. Okay, so where am I going with this? So we're looking at this National Academy report on Health Now that we hope features sort of social factors. But there was an earlier one. The National Academies did one in maybe 2015. Nancy Adler chaired the panel. She's a psychologist. And what it tried to do was boil the social environment down for electronic health records to 15 measures, 15 questions, and you could capture the person's social environment. It reminded me, those of us who've been here 7/10 of the century, remember Name That Tune? And I always laugh when I hear the people at the medical center talking about it, because I can name that social context in 10 questions. I really can't. So I think that in moving back to practice, there are things that encourage me, and Izumi talked about some, but Michael Spencer's work, Lorraine's work, Larry's work in community-based participatory research, but also the practice-based research networks, because, and the Academy's talking about them, the Grand Challenges are talking about them, John Brecky talks about them particularly articulately, but they're formally constructed constellations of schools of social work of all sizes, and the partnering is really nice with the practice communities with which they interact and with the community members of those practice communities. So it's a way of bidirectional communication. And I think we really need to maximize our skills at translation and continue to contribute in that way. So I don't think we could have done this National Academies report that it looks like we've got, you know, thanks to Darla. Going without Darla, without Robin Golden. Robin Golden's an advanced practitioner who's doing research now, who's puts many of us to shame. And so I'm heartened by those directions. We really do have to work on measuring social impact, and we have to also find a place, I think, in this, you know, privileging of things that are still hard science for public intellectuals. At George Warren Brown, is Mike still here? Can I say this? At George Warren Brown, before I left, I'm retired from there, you know, we have public health now in social work. And when they were discussing one candidate and he didn't have a lot of NIH grants and he didn't have a lot of publications, it occurred to me that Mark Rank might not have gotten tenure at that moment. So I rest my case there.
Sorry. Kathy Wehrmann, president of NASW. I have a list of reflections, and I'll just go through them like this. What an incredibly grounding and gratifying afternoon. Certainly challenging, but I kept thinking how great it would be if all practicing social workers would have an opportunity to hear what we talked about today. And so that led me, I mean, it's really our story, where we came from, where we are, where we're headed. And I think everybody owns a bit of that, which makes me wonder, is there a way that we can make some of the content more readily available in non-cardboard tasting form for those practitioners to snack on? That's one thing that I was hoping. I was also thinking about, in general, based on a presentation that I heard earlier in the conference this week, the bright and brilliant presentations. That is something that I wish we could really work on as academics, to be able to present our research in ways that are really digestible. I think it would help tremendously in our advocacy efforts to be able to do so. And I think it would bring our practitioners with us as we explore these new horizons and help them get the benefit more readily. I was wondering, as I sat through this afternoon, how NASW could partner with the Academy to help deliver some of this practice information from all levels more effectively to the practitioner. And just finally, I want to say that I'm really happy to say that NASW is very supportive of the Special Commission on Macro's efforts. So I'll be excited to see how things develop as that goes along. And thank you.
No, you guys go and I'll go last.
Okay. Hi, for those of you who don't know, I'm Darla Spence Coffey from the Council on Social Work Education, and I want to thank Mark and the other folks that planned this symposium for inviting me to be here at the end of a very rich week, right? I still will contend, though, that I really enjoy the SWOR conference because it's one that I am not responsible for. In the least, I can just show up and think along with you, and I have taken voluminous notes in many different kinds of sessions since I came into town for the conferences on Tuesday. So this has been a very long week. So I also am going to follow Kathy's, as Sarah said, we did not get anybody's information ahead of time, so I was a little anxious about all of this. And I will say that each one of the presentations could warrant the same sort of attention and response. So it's quite challenging to figure out what to pull out. So I've decided to focus on a couple of things. One, I'm going to share some observations and make responses to the presentations, some of them sort of meta observations perhaps. And then I also want to ask you to just think with me about our collective future. So first for observations, I noticed from the beginning that the guiding questions for the symposium, at least two of those questions talked about how we could define, protect, stake out our turf. And I'm just noticing that. That is a concern for sure. I don't think that we need to be as concerned as some people think we do. I mean, yes, there are lots of other professions that are speaking social work. As Sarah mentioned, I'm in lots of different circles with other health professionals and other kinds of professional education groups, and they sound a lot like social workers. And at first, I started to also figure out where I needed to set the boundaries and make sure that folks knew that we were there first. Speaking to Dr. Curtis's phrase, I love the fierce urgency of now. To me, it feels like if we start being more concerned about turf than finding strategic partners to address the fierce urgency of now, we're going to really be in trouble. And so I just wanted to share that. The other thing that I noticed was that the four areas that we focused on today, policy, administration, community, and then practice with individuals, groups, and families. We heard from well-respected scholars who have spent their life and reading the work of the body of work of lots of other folks. We don't always think about how students receive this information in the curriculum. We almost leave it to students to do the integration. It's great that I can decide to focus on one of those four areas, but we need to really think about how in our curriculum there's some intentionality about linking these things. And I know that there's lots of creativity and innovation going on in education to facilitate that kind of vertical and horizontal integration that isn't as easy. I mean, this is why students go to the field and say, okay, I'm going to forget everything I just got taught in the classroom because this is real life. And they start piecing things together, but we're almost asking them to deconstruct what they've learned and then reconstruct it again. And so I think that we should take some responsibility for that in the classroom. The other thing and I'm making this observation from when I was a part of a social work education program and when I was in administration at an institution, that we really still struggle, I think, in higher education about whose interests are being served by our curriculum. It is still very much, it's my pet subject areas, and I want to make sure that I get to teach what I've spent my time, focusing on and working on, and not really thinking through the lens of the learner and what it is that they need. And so I'm just going to put that challenge out as something that we need to keep paying attention to. I don't think that Michael Reich is still here, but he made a very good point about please stop calling practice with individuals, families, and groups direct practice, because I also do direct practice. I don't know what the solution to that is, because that is just part of our language for so long, and so it's going to be really hard to change. But we do a lot of, we trip ourselves up with our language a lot. I would love to get to the day when we don't have to say macro practice as if it's something different than social work practice. Because in my mind, social work practice is macro practice, micro practice, policy practice. It's all of those things. And I think that we hurt ourselves when we slice and dice our practice like that. So now I'm going to flip to the future. So the Council on Social Work Education is involved in a couple of initiatives to think about the future. And we've engaged outside consultants to help us do that. So one is the Future Social Work Profession. Some of you may have heard about that. And we engaged a consultant that has done a lot of work with other health professions. And he came thinking that he knew social work. And then he's discovered that he really didn't know. And every time he meets with us in lots of different settings, he's got more and more questions. And I learn from his questions, because we do continue to really trip up ourselves over and over again. And we love our language that doesn't necessarily translate to outsiders. And we really need to think about that in this world of interprofessional and interdisciplinary collaboration. So, yes, we've been thinking about the future of the social work profession, and it's really hard to think about the future. Anytime you think about the future, you spend most of your time thinking about where we've been and hope that that sort of guides you for the future. And so our consultant has really tried to push us into that space that's very uncomfortable, and we can really imagine. And it can't be a sharp pivot, obviously, but places where we're seeing as innovations, maybe those things should become business as usual. So we're thinking about things about social work really staking out a role of leadership, writ large, within the profession, but certainly with other professions. Instead of using technology, we feel good when we've got online or hybrid classes and so forth, and there are some that are paying attention to the ways in which technology is changing the delivery of practice in lots of ways. But are we at the table? Are we really shaping those innovations and those applications? And so those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. Two pieces of literature that came my way in this process that I'm going to suggest, if you're not aware of it, you should read it. It might be a little scary. One is Susskind and Susskind wrote a book, The Future of the Professions. I think it came out maybe 3 years ago now. And it is terrifying in some respects. It's talking about other professions besides social work. Social work's actually not listed in the professions that they look at. But they're talking about the implications of technology and maybe even more specifically artificial intelligence on the professions. And when knowledge gets democratized, and yet, we say that professions are about knowledge generation and dissemination of knowledge, and we're sort of gatekeepers of that knowledge. But when knowledge is really democratized, when anybody can go on Dr. Google or MD, how does that change? What's left for each of the professions to offer? I don't know the answers to that, but we really need to be thinking about that. The other, Jeff Salingo, is a journalist. He's written about higher education a lot. He's written for the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and he's written a very thoughtful piece about the future of the degree. And this should terrify institutions of higher ed, because basically what he's saying is that the degree is going to change completely. We're talking about really fundamentally changing the relationship between students and institutions of higher learning. That this notion that you need to just get people in a seat for 4 years and they come out prepared is something that we need to get over. You know, there's probably discrete sets of skills that we can think about delivering in a just-in-time fashion and have sort of lifelong connections and relationships with students from our institutions of higher education, so that, you know, so that it's meeting their needs in a lifelong learning capacity. Fascinating stuff. I just wanted to throw it out because I think that that's also part of what we need to be thinking about with our profession. Thank you.
All right. So similar to my colleagues that went before me, so I was sitting back there also fiercely taking notes on all of the wonderful information that was being shared by scholars. And I actually, as a president of SWIR, I want to take it from a more of a research perspective as we think about sort of where we are and where I think we should be moving forward. I think in the last 25 to 27 years that that our field has really taken a pivot. And I think it started out of that 1991 report to NIMH that was done around research infrastructure within our field. It really made a change in our field with schools, with NIH taking an investment in us as a profession, and with also schools developing a very strong infrastructure for research. And I think that informed doctoral training and the quality of doctoral training. It informed what I consider a little bit of the arms race that's going on between schools of social work about being the bigger and the better, and how much money can you have, and those types of things. But I think it's also done some other things. It's increased publications. Publications from our profession have gone up tremendously. It's also improved resources, because what it has is made schools of social work much more savvy about getting resources from other places in addition to the NIH sort of thing. It was instrumental in the founding of SWIR from 1993. So that organization also came out of that, out of the change that we started to shift. And it talked about us going from science, from being more an applied profession to fitting into a science, and also trying to understand how we fit within the university structure as higher education went more towards more grants, more dollars, and how we fit within that. And I think it was a real challenge for us as a professional school. Moving forward, though, I think there's some. I think now social work is truly in, I call it, a second renaissance. And maybe it's just me, but I feel that way, because I think there's some things that's going on now that's really sort of have been that's really moving us forward with some new way of thinking. The grand challenges, even though you may not agree with it, it's really it's developed a platform for us to have more discourse about the profession. It's bring about ways for us to do more sort of collaboration around research. The networks that's come out of the grand challenges are seeing people come together across the country from various universities and trying to bring together common interest around certain areas and move those things forward. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for us. It's even being incorporated into our education and hopefully within practice. The other thing that seems to be going on that I say is a renaissance is there's probably, I've been around for probably 50 of the years of what's going on with that first for that first 100 years. But I think there's a stronger collaboration between our social work organizations now than they ever have been. And I think that is also a very, very helpful thing, because it says that we're finding some common ground, and I hope from that that we'll be able to leverage those relationships to move us better into the areas of social policy and government relation, which I think will be very important for our profession, and to understand that. And also, hopefully, it will allow us to expand the areas of inclusion that we need to begin to still look at. Because I agree with Sarah that as we went more towards a science, I think we have sort of left some people behind, which was really clear of who our profession was really built on to sort of incorporate. Going forward, and I think the pending opportunities where we can look continually for training. The increase in doctoral education in our country is a great opportunity for knowledge development and training, and to correct the types of knowledge that's available for us to address some of the issues that was brought up by the presenters of where we're going in those particular areas. It's obviously apparently also that there's a growth in our global engagement and global initiatives. And that changes our profession from where it really started as something that was in the boundaries of this country, and now that we know that with globalization, that a lot of the issues that we're addressing in our profession is no longer just within the boundaries of the U.S., and we need to sort of think larger in those particular areas as well. I think there's some new areas where we can also begin to look moving forward that we haven't. Sustainability and environmental issues, which we've never sort of had a lot of, and I think in the area of macro practice, and even within whatever area of practice, I think that we can begin to look at those types of things that we've not addressed and partner with some new disciplines that we haven't partnered with to begin to look at how to implement some additional changes. And then the last thing that I would like to say is I think that which also where we've been is that we started out talking about policy and policy research. I think social work as an organization and in our research have really started to move more around the area of policy and how do we incorporate policy and have knowledge of policy. And I think it's starting to grow even more, and I think what has happened last November with our current situation is showing us that if we are not aware of policy, and if we don't really sort of immerse ourselves in that in many ways, depending on who's running and who's living in 1600 Pennsylvania, it has a definite impact on the population that we serve. And so I think those types of things sort of forces us, someone asked earlier said it's a reactive, forces us to begin to think about how we incorporate those things in the way that we do things, and so that we can be much more successful as a profession and the way we go. So I will leave it at that, and hopefully it will bring some conversation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to make a few comments. I'll try to keep my comments brief, given that NESW already had a little bit of some airtime. As I reflected on our discussion today, and I do agree it was really a good discussion in some ways. It kind of puts a lot in your brain. You're trying to sort through it all. But one of the things that I reflected on is something that's not apparently, there, but is there in every one of the discussions. And we talked about the four components as if they were silos, but we know they all overlap. And there's actually a golden thread that runs through all four of those. And there's a golden thread that's been running through this 100-year history of social work, and that's social work leadership. We've had leadership within the profession that's been pointed inward to sort of see how do we move the curve as a profession. And then we've had social work leadership that's looked out in terms of how do we move the country. And if you think about the first renaissance of social work, those first 100 years, the only really conclusion we can make is that we've been on a 100-year positive trajectory. That we've had some elbows, we've had some up and downs, but all in all, we have moved the profession. And I can remember when I first joined NASW back in the late 70s, and I used to go to hotels, and they were smaller than this in the panhandle of Texas, and we're talking about we're going to get licensure, we're going to get third-party reimbursement, and we're going to get these things. And I was a 19-year-old sophomore, and they said we're going to be a legitimate profession at the big boy table, the big person table. And I said, I don't know if those things are going to happen. But we had the leadership to make those things happen. And as I think about the second renaissance, it really becomes a question of, how are we going to sustain our leadership? What are the things we're going to do to sustain and strengthen the leadership within the profession to where we do have the collective impact that we want to have, where we do make the the kind of impact for society that we want to make. You know, we talk a lot about improving our research, improving our education, improving our practice, but that's all, the bottom line there is we want to have better responses, better methods, better methodologies, so we can get better outcomes for the individuals and the families and the communities and the groups that we work with. And that's why we do it. We don't do it so we can be more elite, more professional. We do it so we can bring about the changes that we want to bring about. And Kathy mentioned the sort of the best and brilliant, and they in their presentation they asked themselves a question, you know, fill in the blank. You know, I dream a world, fill in the blank. And I think collectively we would say we collectively dream of a world where, you know, fill in the blank. And for me, the fill in the blank is we dream of a world, we dream of a profession where we have supported and strengthened our leadership. So the second renaissance of social work over the next 100 years will be just as positive as the last 100 years. And I appreciate James Herbert talking about how the different social work professions or social work organizations and associations are coming together, understanding that we can get more done if we collaborate and work together. So with that, I'll turn it back.
Thank you. That couldn't have ended on a better note from my perspective. We did organize this at a conference of social work scholars and you know, co-sponsored with the Academy and SWR, which is made up overwhelmingly of social work scholars, but I also know that those social work scholars consider themselves social workers. So it was great to have at least, you know, kind of a reflection at the end there with the other social work organizations. That's great as a scholar to think that those organizations are working together, because in the absence of that, we really can't achieve the mission of the profession. As I said, we wanted to start or renew a discussion of these questions today. I'm thoroughly satisfied personally with the symposium in terms of the breadth of questions raised. The level of agreement and disagreement was wonderful from my perspective, and to be continued. And just to remind everyone, we have recorded all of this. We now have to edit it, but we will make it as readily available as we can, and we hope that folks in social work education and social work scholarly community will use that. You have a question about that?
About that, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that recognizing that we all have to learn in this world to get along with one another. We all have to learn a way to communicate with one another that does not shut people off from us, that we all have to learn how to operate with a certain level of decorum. But as we have the representatives of leading, let's say the leadership, many people who represent the leadership of our profession, I would like to strongly implore and request that in spite of all those things that I said before that I know we need to operate within, that you hold our profession's feet to the fire, that you no longer allow us to increasingly provide what I consider, and as I've talked with many other people, a lot of lip service to what it is our profession is supposed to be about. You all have the ability to lead the way in that. And so this was good, just to get different perspectives. And it's easy for us to recognize the good things about our profession. It is not as easy to be critical about ourselves and where we need to go. And so as the leadership of the profession, I beg you, I implore you to help bring our profession back to not only what it was originally intended to be, but to help make it even more than that.
Thank you. And then to finish the second part of the sentence, thank you very much. In addition to archiving this, this is going to be a special issue social service review. And these folks that have written these papers, they've been given much to think about today. I particularly want to thank the discussants, who I all think did a great job, by the way. And it gives me as an editor lots to think about in terms of you know, who to send these papers out to for review, so they get that feedback as well. And again, at Social Service Review, we consider this an ongoing discourse that we've been engaged in since 1927, for 90 plus of those years, and we intend to continue to do that. And because of Michael Sawson's gift, we have some resources. This is the first use of those resources, and it won't be the last use of those resources. So I want to thank everybody for being here. We had it when we had it. It's not, you say, well, at the end of the conference along, it's all true, but if we just organized this in Chicago, I don't think it would have been nearly as easy to get the folks that we got here. And so particularly those of you stuck around till the end. So thank you so much, and continue the discussion.